Good afternoon, or whatever time it is where you are and when you're listening to this. Um, so, I absolutely love a cheesy or even not that cheesy horror paperback from that kind of 70s, 80s era. Paperbacks from hell, as they're sometimes called. So I grabbed this one when I came across it in a secondhand store. So this is The Possession of Joel Delaney, and it came out in 1970. And while there are a couple of different print runs with different covers that you'll find for this one, I really appreciated this dramatic red that they chose here. To me, it was like the shade of red that blood is in like Hammer horror classic movies or Dario Argento movies, that kind of really like tomatoey bright red. And then the dynamic blurry image that could be a face screaming and candles hinting at some kind of strange rites or rituals. I just thought it was a great cover. It's not the normal illustrated cover that a lot of paperbacks in this era tend to have, but it's pretty striking, which is cool. So the word possession in the title and the endorsement at the top of the cover there mentions The Exorcist, which is a little misleading. This book actually came out before The Exorcist, not this copy, but the original print run, by about a year. But the, Satanists and possession was already a popular theme for horror books and movies in this era. Though, I mean, you could argue that it's a perennially popular theme, really. So though it may not seem so now, movies became increasingly sort of shocking and violent in this era, and this book is leaning into that market for that sort of darker horror kind of story. So The Possession of Joel Delaney is narrated by Nora. She's a divorced mother of two living in New York, and she finds her brother overdosed on drugs in his apartment one night after he failed to come to dinner. So after a short stint in Bellevue, he's released into her care and goes to live at her home. But Nora soon becomes alarmed by his strange behavior and increasingly erratic actions. Her kind and gentle brother does not seem like himself sometimes. Ooh, spooky. So Nora, our lead character, she gets us right into the story, explaining her background, summing herself up. The book is at pains to let us know that she's educated and not badly off, implying that she's not the type to be superstitious or easily duped. She's also not a woman who has strong intuitions or anything of that nature. She's a simple, down-to-earth, everyday sort of woman. And this builds for us that we can believe her. She's not a kook, she's ordinary, she's not engaging in any strange behaviors or anything like that. And it also hints that if this could happen in her family, then it could happen to anyone. So I really liked the way the author built this into the narrative. It's kind of very smoothly done. I also like the way the book builds her safe home, normal life with normal kids. As I said, it's not the type of family that things happen to, at least not in our minds. I feel like every true crime show starts with, that kind of, they were a normal family in a normal town, you know what I mean? But there's also a sense or a feeling that there are dark, strange things, tragedy and danger on the periphery of her life. For example, her ex-husband is a scientist and he's studying a new type of plague that has broken out. So it's kind of on the side. Her mother committed suicide in the past. And they also have a psychologist friend who studies demonology. So there's kind of these little things that are on the fringe of the normal, almost as if they could kind of encroach on the American upwardly mobile family at any time. So I really liked Nora. I think she comes across as very nice. She cares about her children. She cares about her brother. She's a very 1970s woman in that she's educated and she has this gentle sense of humor about the people around her. She doesn't have any bitterness. But she's also of that era where she was raised to take care of other people, her brother, her husband, her children, and to sort of not question or sort of bow to more professional opinions or even her ex-husband's opinion. She's a little self-deprecating, a little put upon. She's not an 80s woman that you would see much more strongly in fiction in that next decade, who might be more assertive, more outgoing, more glamorous. So I just thought that was like an interesting, it was just interesting. I liked her, and I really liked spending time with her in this book. There were times when she kind of said something and I was like, that's pretty funny, you know? Yeah, I mentioned above that Exorcist reference on the cover, and that was a bit misleading. So just to get into that a little bit more, without wanting to give too much away, the book is not a traditional demon possession and exorcism sort of genre story. There are no like priests in this book, no typical demon that has to be identified and cast out, that kind of plot line. The story is more about leaning into the gap between that safe, white, wealthy life of Nora's world and the more unknown, unseen world, the places where Nora's maid lives, for example, and her brother chooses to live. So in this zone, her brother lives in a, what would you call it, more salubrious area of town. So her brother is sort of not like her. He's experimenting with drugs. He parties. He lives the more bohemian life that sort of came out of the 60s. And also into this zone is the migrant worker from South America, Latin America, the Caribbean, other places. The link between these worlds is the academic I mentioned earlier, who studies the phenomena of spirit possession across different cultures. And then that sort of links with the people in this area of New York who practice or believe in things like Santeria, Voodoo, or Abaya, if I'm pronouncing that right. I'm sorry if I'm not. Religions where a Loa or spirit can enter a person. So what we might see as possession of a person, but not, it's a little different to the way, I guess I'm thinking of that sort of, you know, in The Exorcist, it's very, or in a lot of demon movies, it's sort of like that Catholic idea of possession, that, or maybe I should say Christian, you know, like that kind of idea. This is coming from a different space. And, you know, I liked that the book doesn't look down on this religion or philosophy or these religions, these ideas, which I think is kind of important because it's not condemning them or sensationalizing them or even trying to make it like they're primitive or sort of, I feel like a lot of books or movies before this used to be sort of like, look at these savage religions kind of thing. And it's not, the book isn't saying that at all, which I think is great for the narrative and that it makes it more scary. But I think it's also just a little bit respectful of different beliefs and ideas, which I think is important. Yeah, so the gods or spirits of the religion, I think it's not really super specified which one it is. I'm trying really hard to not say too much and spoil anything in the story, in case you want to read it. But yeah, that religion is not the big bad in this book. But yeah, to not give too much away, I think it's important that this book came out just a year after the Tate LaBianca murders from the Manson family, at a time when serial killers were more prevalent and just starting to be studied. If you've seen the show Mindhunter, or like if you're interested in that kind of thing, that had kind of all just sort of started to be cemented. And there was also this younger generation who were dropping out and experimenting with LSD and other drugs. So they were rejecting the conventional life, which Nora exemplifies, and toying with other ways of living, which is kind of more what Joel Delaney is looking for, something a little more depth, a little more spiritual, a little bit more open-minded. So in this time period, there was a lot of kind of shock that cults could use mind control like techniques and turn supposedly normal younger people into murderers who did drugs and took lives. Yeah, some people felt, and I've heard people say this even recently, that doing a kind of drug that would take you out of yourself or act like meditation left you open to outside influences that could invade you and take you over. So sort of like you're leaving your mind open to these kinds of influences. Now, I'm not saying that's true. I'm just saying this is... Can you hear my cat? Hi, Grimmy. No, Grim, you've already had 2 breakfasts. Enough snacks for you, sir. It's a little bit cold today, so sometimes he gets a bit more hungry when it's a bit cold. Anyway, my point is just that people were sort of struggling to understand or explain to themselves how someone like Charles Manson could influence his cult, his family, to carry out brutal murders. And this is the kind of possession or idea that's explored and that the title refers to. So Nora's younger brother has not been thriving in life, and he's experimenting with drugs and things. He's rejected a conventional life path, the sort of family 9-to-5 job, that whole thing, little picket fence. He's not into that. And he's also been through a lot. He lost his mother at a young age, and he was sent to boarding school where he really didn't thrive. So that was really difficult. So you get this sense that he's a younger person of that generation who's more vulnerable to psychic attack or being drawn into that counterculture as implied in the story. And that is reinforced by there's a little kick in the tail in the last paragraph of the book, which I won't spoil for you, but it sort of makes this point that the author is exploring quite clear. So those were kind of some of the ideas at the time that this book is sort of springing out from. Obviously, the book is from 1970, so there are things we understand better now, and more research has been done and all that kind of stuff. So I'm not trying to say any of those attitudes are correct or whatever. I'm just kind of explaining sort of the themes of the book or whatever, okay? So just for perspective. So this book is quite short at 215 pages compared to some of the chunky boys that proliferate in this horror paperback genre. If you think of Stephen King, some of his books are really long. But the story has a lot of atmosphere. The carriage house home that Nora lives in and the academic environment in New York kind of gave me a feeling, a little bit of dark academia in some ways, even a slightly cozy feeling. Nora lives in a nice, safe home in an older building, and her kids walk to school. They have this lovely sort of oversized dog. They often talk about a fireplace, and outside it's winter, so there's a bit of sort of snow and things like that. The homes that she visits and the hospital that Joel is sent to at one point are sort of more gothic and wood paneled. So that's the kind of vibe that you're getting a little bit. The times that she heads down into the area, and I don't know New York super well. She does say which area it is, but I've forgotten. And it's probably gentrified by now as well. But the time she heads down into the area where her maid lives or her brother lives, the sort of less well-heeled part of town, shall we say, it's not so cozy, of course, there. But here we get a sense of families, a sense of candles, darkness, cluttered environments, little nooks and crannies in oddly built, crumbling apartments. So it still has this vibe, for sure. The book has some dark moments, all the more startling because the plot moves a little bit like a ghost story in that sort of pacing and the way it builds, starting with the uncomfortable and sort of weird type scary rather than, just full on gory. So when there is death or violence, it's kind of a shock. It's quite stark and fearsome. It's used well, building slowly, making you wonder where it's heading a little bit and what's going on. The book is definitely not as gory as some other horror books of that era, if that's what you're looking for. But it worked well for me. I was really enjoying it. I liked Nora and her story, especially the way the darkness on the fringes of a calm, safe, sort of American life are always there, and can easily be invited into the house under the guise of someone we love and trust and think we know. And that it happens to a family who are not religious or who are sort of very much have a scientific mind, educated people. I feel like that was just used really well. And so if the title is familiar to you, the book was also adapted into a movie with the same name. It starred Shirley MacLaine as Nora with this amazing, I think it's a wig, she's this kind of curly hair, but it has quite a different vibe to the book. Yeah, so it has quite a different vibe than the book. It feels much more fresh and modern in tone. There's lots of white painted spaces, modern rooms. very 70s fashion. There's more of a focus on the class divide than the book explores or foregrounds. I mean, it's obviously there in the book, but it's one of the more major themes in the film. Nora is much less sympathetic. She, in the movie, she doesn't have a sense of humor, and she's much more bossy and strident, more of a rich, entitled woman. Not as much of a nice woman out of her depth. She's a lot less relatable. And I mean, the movie mostly follows the book plot-wise. It's not too different. But it feels like the direction was less assured that the film was going to be scary than the book. It feels like the direction was less assured that the film was going to be scary. Because I think it's a little... The book is scary, but it starts off quite subtly. And it's... When you take away the atmosphere like the film did, it's almost like there's not enough there to really create what the book does. So it added a theme that Nora is kind of in an incestuous relationship with her brother, which is really icky. And it makes it hard to be invested in the film because the main character who we're supposed to, the main characters who we're supposed to follow and care about are really difficult to like and to care about. So there's that. It also has a famously controversial scene near the end where Nora's children are humiliated by the possessed Joel. It's not scary. It's just gross and unnecessary. It really adds nothing. And it feels like a desperate attempt to be relevant or shocking. And it's really kind of like well, I don't want to say too much, but it feels tacked on because it doesn't feel like it comes out of the motivation of the characters. I'll leave it at that. So it's just trying to be edgy, really. Also, in my opinion, Joel's love interest, Sherry, in the movie, she looks styled to look a little bit like Sharon Tate, which is pretty kind of on the nose there. Maybe it's a little bit much. So that's the movie. But yeah, a final little fact for you that I just sort of found interesting when I was looking up the author, Ramona Stewart. She was the author of the book that was adapted into Desert Fury in 1947, if you know that film. It's a film noir starring Elizabeth Scott and Burt Lancaster, and it is high camp and melodrama. And famously, it used to be known as the, quote, gayest film in history, which I think is adorable because the homosexuality in this film was pretty blatant for the time period. Sometimes in films of that time period, they would kind of soften things. So it was sort of like if you know, you know, but if you're not aware, it can kind of go over your head. Like that's how they would get around the censors a little bit. And this film was so much more direct in what was going on. And it's cool because Stewart often wrote books with interesting female leads and characters who are some of the earlier depictions in books of homosexual relationships as normalized, So I just found that really interesting. She's an interesting writer in some ways. I think a little bit maybe more forgotten in our era. But yeah, that's her background. So that's The Possession of Joel Delaney by Ramona Stewart. Have you read this one or anything else by the author? I would love to hear, because this is the only one of hers that I have read. Obviously, I've seen Desert Fury, and it's good fun. But have you seen the movie? Some of you might have seen the movie in the theater back in the day, so I'd love to know if you remember the controversy around it or anything like that. What did you think? Please let me know in the comments. I always love to hear what your guys' story is behind reading things I share with you. And thank you for watching. You can check out some of my other videos. I also have another channel and socials, so you can find links below if you want more of that. And if you want to hang out again, remember to like and subscribe. And you can always leave a comment, let me know what you thought, or let me know what else you might want to see. Thank you.